This episode of Planted is brought to you by Pax Labs.
The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pine. I'm Sara Pine, your host, and we are recording on location at ICBC Berlin. It is a beautiful day. I am sitting in a lovely room, and I am here with Ed Wells, VP of Sales from Cannatrol. Ed, welcome. I am so excited to have you here today. We are going to geek out. How are you?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to chat with you.
Absolutely. So I always like to ask my guests the first time they're on the show, what was your first cannabis experience?
Oh, goodness. Nothing really that sticks out that was very memorable. I just know I was, I guess, a late bloomer by a lot of standards. I didn't even try cannabis for the first time until I was 20. And then because of the career path I was in at the time, I didn't really consume cannabis very much until I was in my mid-30s. And then it became part of my somewhat everyday life and then became a career change as well.
How did you get into it?
Into cannabis or into it as cannabis as a career?
Into cannabis as a career.
Actually, it's a fun story. So I started consuming cannabis on a regular basis, and I quickly realized, wow, I don't really know where it's coming from. I can only get what the guy has when I get a hold of him and I want to get some. And I lived in Vermont at the time, which is where I've spent most of my life. And we were legal to home grow at that time. So I started growing, and I quickly, dove right in and wanted to learn as much as I could because I get a little bit obsessive with hobbies sometimes. And I quickly realized that, wow, the dry and cure is going to be the hardest part. Like everybody tells me, that's what you got to nail. You got to nail the dry and cure. It's going to be horrible. You're going to have harsh weed. And I started researching, and I found there's this little company the next town over from where I lived, or I guess technically at that time, 2 towns from where I lived, named Cannatrol. And I found out they were going to be at an event called Terptown Throwdown in Massachusetts. So I went down there, and part of my goal was just to meet them, learn more. So I met Jane and David, and we chatted, and, they asked me what my background was. And, they invited me, said, oh, well, sometime you should swing by our shop. And I did, after work one day, and we chatted some more, and they're like, well, what would you think about maybe a career change? And we get to know each other a little more. And, then when they were ready, they made me an offer, and I have been, with the company for just about 4.5 years now. And it's been a great ride so far. Yeah.
4.5 years is a long time in this industry.
That's what I've been told. Yeah. A couple more years, I might even be an OG. I don't know. No, not really. But yeah, there is definitely a joke about, cannabis years versus regular years in the industry.
Oh yeah, there definitely is. And another thing I really like about our colleagues is, like you were saying, how you really get into your hobbies and kind of, get into that focus. I think a lot of us get into the hyper focus with the things that we enjoy, because I know for me, when I got into the industry, I had no idea that this was what I was going to continue doing. But once you get hooked, there's always something new to learn, and we're always being proven wrong. And I think that for those of us who really like to geek out on things and immerse ourselves, it's fertile space to be able to do that.
Yeah, for sure. I think that cannabis, the industry is very unique in the sense that more people in this industry are in it because of the true love and passion for it. Mm-hmm. Than a lot of other industries, for sure.
Yeah.
A lot of things are just a means to an end, but cannabis, people really enjoy what they're doing. They love it. So it's always exciting to see that, be around people that everyone's just, so engaged and energized.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's more so than because I did corporate, and then I was in nonprofit for many years, but even more so than I shifted to nonprofit because I was so tired of the button down. And I wanted to do something good for the world. But I get to do that in this, but also there's a lot more room to show up as your authentic self. We have so many different personalities, and I just love that. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I agree.
So for people who might not be familiar with Cannatrol, you want to give them a...
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a unique and patented technology that controls vapor pressure. And that was originally developed for helping artisanal cheesemakers control their cheese aging and cheese making process. Then it moved into charcuterie meats, and now it's applied to cannabis. And so it's really revolutionary and game changing in the sense that it takes the most difficult part of the process where people end up having the most variation in their results, and it truly makes it a set it and forget it. It's it's game changing. It allows producers to give their clients a more consistent product, a more stable product, and it gives the consumers a much better experience because they're able to get a much higher quality cannabis that is, enjoyable on a much higher level, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that it's so important to have those tools both for large scale and consumers, because as we're seeing throughout the world, especially in areas where large multi-state operators or multi-country operators are coming in, they're trying to really squelch the home grow. And to me, it's just ridiculous because it's not competition. I mean, I can buy my own tomatoes. I can grow my own tomatoes. I go to the store. But I have to say, my friend who cultivates her tomatoes and gifts them to me, I always treasure them.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, we definitely love the home growers at Cannatrol. We have we have a solution that's a big part of our company is geared towards home growers. When David first had the idea, our inventor David had the idea to apply the technology to cannabis. No one was really keen to give him a room full of very, very valuable cannabis product of cannabis flower to, test his idea and see if it was going to work. So he kind of built a scaled down version of what was already being done for cheesemakers and like charcuterie industry folks. Mm-hmm. And it was meant to just be a little prototype proof of concept. And what that morphed into quickly was a realization that there was a market for a small unit like that because home growers were very serious about their results and faced the same challenges that commercial growers did. So home grow has always been a huge part of our story since we've been in cannabis.
Yeah, I love that.
And most of our team actually are passionate home growers themselves, really.
So do you compare your harvests ever?
Do I what?
Compare your harvests with your colleagues ever?
Yes, definitely. And there's people that we trade seeds. I was based at our headquarters in Vermont. Now I'm in Miami, so I don't get to see them face to face as much. But some of my colleagues and I have definitely shared our flower, shared clones. I got this really great pheno that I hunted from seed, or I got a really great clone from a friend, and then we give them a cutting of it, and so they can grow and enjoy it too. So
I love that. I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about cultivation in our industry, and I love geeking out on it, especially because when you meet people and you learn about their technique, whether it's a home grower or a craft farm or somebody who's doing a larger scale cultivation, you really get to see personal style, ethos. It's just really fascinating. But where do you see post-harvest getting overlooked or misunderstood right now?
Oh, I think it always has been, not just right now. I think we're seeing an improvement of, level of focus on it. I think historically it's an industry in an area where there wasn't a lot of opportunity for research and development. When it was an illicit market, companies weren't putting a lot of money into developing, specific products for cannabis. So people kind of, they knew they had a product. They knew they needed to dry it. They knew a dehumidifier. If you put it in something wet in a room and it had a dehumidifier, it was going to dry it. So, they kind of just used what they had, and, to no fault, but it just wasn't something that there was a lot of effort on the innovation side being put into it. And, people always think, I always think of like, the general consensus is the sexy part of it is the grow rooms. When someone's building out their facility, they'll often show us the blueprints and they'll like see all these flower rooms and then the room for like their fertigation where they're mixing their batches and have their batch tanks and so forth. And then you're like, oh, what's this little closet looking space in the corner? And like, oh, that's our dry cure. So we see that a lot, but also I think that we're starting to see a little bit of a paradigm shift where people are realizing as you get into compressed markets, competition gets tougher, margins get smaller. And if you want to survive, you really got to find ways to differentiate yourself. And to think that you're going to have access to the same genetics, the same growing medium, the same lighting, the same fertigation systems, and somehow you're going to be the one to have all those same, things at your fingertips, but you're going to magically outgrow everyone else, even though they have access to the same things. It's just not realistic.
Yeah.
So if you want to find a place to really, truly differentiate yourself, I'm sorry, but that's just not the garden as much as it used to be. There's some people that may do things better than others, and there may be genetics that someone else hasn't got yet or whatever. But if you really want to find a way to set yourself apart, it's the post-harvest. It's how you finish is what Jane, our CEO, says. It's how you finish. It's realizing that harvest is only the 50-yard line and you've got the rest of the way to go to get to an amazing product that you are going to be proud to pass on to a consumer. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, quality is what matters. And when we talk about quality at this stage, what are we really protecting?
Well, there's a few different things. You talk about smokability as one. There's, study that's still ongoing, the science of smokability. But one of the findings that I felt was like most validating for me was that one of the things that you could very easily draw a correlation to as far as smoothness of smoke and preference was water activity. And water activity is basically what we focus on because it's how we measure shelf stability, whether, flour is stable or whether it could support mold or microbial growth. And the marker of where that you hit that point and what we recommend with our systems is also where consumers are finding that they feel the flour smokes the smoothest. So that's a marker of quality, but also consistency. If you can put out a beautiful flour and sometimes it smokes smooth and sometimes you had a good cure, it means sometimes you didn't. So consistency is a big part of quality. The smoothness of the smoke and the terpenes, you want those terpene profiles to develop and be really rich, and you want to taste them when you smoke the flour. Because ultimately what's going on in those trichome heads is the production of terpenes and cannabinoids. That's the whole reason we're growing these plants. So if you're not going to make your best effort and do everything you can to protect those compounds so that the consumer can enjoy them at the end of the process, then you're not really giving them the best quality that you're able to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, in our industry, we have to have way more conversations, not only about the finishing of the product, but also storage, because these terpenes are so volatile. So even if as a grower, you can be really careful with that, but when you're looking at transportation, when it finally gets to the dispensary, it's like, what are we looking at as far as consumer experience if this plant isn't treated with the utmost care, not just with the curing, but also the storage afterwards? Still smoking joints? Okay, we need to talk. If you love cannabis but you're still lighting it, let's look at what's actually happening. When you burn flower, you're creating smoke, and that smoke contains harmful compounds like tar, soot, benzene, and formaldehyde. In fact, almost 200 different compounds have been detected in joint smoke. So how do we know this? PAX decided to study it. In controlled lab testing, they compared joint smoke to vapor from their devices, using the same flower under the same conditions, and measured 16 key harmful compounds. The result is pretty striking. Vaporization reduced those compounds by more than 95%, because when you heat cannabis instead of burning it, you change what you inhale. You still get cannabinoids and flavor, just without all the extra stuff that comes from smoke. This isn't about judgment, it's about information. If you want to learn more, go to pax.com/science. PAX is setting higher standards so you can smoke less smoke. And for Planted listeners, get 20% off at PAX.com with code PLANTED20.
For sure. We use we're big on analogies at Cannatrol. So I don't know if you've gathered that from some of the team members you've met, but
I love it.
We compare it to ice cream. We're like, okay, in the supply chain from an ice cream producer to a warehouse, distributor, the grocery store, it's kept in the condition that you need to keep ice cream in the whole time. You're not going to leave ice cream not in the freezer.
Right.
So same thing. You want to have cannabis in, the ideal conditions to dry and cure it. But then, yeah, absolutely. You need to keep it in the right conditions when you're storing it all the way through that supply chain until it gets to the consumer, whether that is long-term storage for an outdoor grower that they have a big harvest at the end of the year, but they can't move all that product in that quick amount of time. And they don't necessarily want to, because when they have that harvest, that's when pricing is compressed the most. We call it Croptober. Everyone's harvesting, pricing dips. You want to hold that product and move it when pricing starts to recover. And if you can't store your product stably, you're not going to be able to do that. No. And then moving on to the dispensary, once, the next step before it gets to the consumer or the customer, if you're not storing it properly there, it'd be like if the grocery store is not storing the ice cream in the freezer once they get it to the store, if they're just putting it on the shelf next to the bread, the consumer's not going to want to get that. So we actually have had some success and helped people have more success in their dispensaries by giving them the ability to store the product in the right conditions at the retail location. We have a dispensary we actually did a storage system for. So their vault is a Cannatrol. This is in Vermont, and feedback we got from one of the partners, their COO, was, we get customers that come in and they say, hey, what do you guys do different? I don't know what it is, but if I buy the same cultivar from the same farm at the dispensary the next town over, it's not as good. I buy it here, it's better. And not only do they have the storage vault, but then they have 3 of our small Cannatrol, the Cool Cure units behind the counter, because we're allowed to do deli style bud in Vermont, which a lot of states in the US are.
I miss that. I love that.
And so they're buying product in that is maybe not dried and cured in our system, but what they're finding is if you store it correctly after the fact, you still have a value add at that point. And so you're still basically able to, maintain quality or maybe even improve quality. And you're also able to find a way to differentiate yourself at the retail level, because the consumers, even before they notice that, hey, when I get the same flower here, it's better than when I get it there, what they are noticing is this dispensary has these really cool devices, and I may not understand. They're telling me what they are and why they're going through this extra step, but this dispensary is doing something different. They're doing something better. So I want to go there because I want to buy from people that care about what they're providing to me as a consumer.
Yeah.
And we did something recently with a dispensary in Colorado as well, and they have 6 of the Cool Cures behind their counter, and they're telling us that's basically our best SKU now. The deli style bud, people are coming back and they want more because they notice the difference. And so that's how you can really make a difference all the way through the supply chain, but also again, a differentiation, opportunity at retail.
Yeah. And I think it's so important for operators to understand true differentiation, because right now with the race to the bottom with prices and the race to the top with THC, those are very fickle markers of differentiation.
I definitely have thoughts on that myself. The THC thing, I don't think it's necessarily sustainable. And I think maybe we're starting to see a little bit of a paradigm shift away from that as well. Because and you've probably heard this analogy before or something similar, but people don't go into the liquor store and be like, well, give me Everclear because it's the highest proof. That's what I want. And consumers for cannabis are, as education of our consumers, we get better at that as an industry. And as the market matures and you get more mature consumers, that's going to shift.
I agree.
And I think a lot of people already understand that THC isn't everything. There's entourage effects, by different changes in how we absorb, cannabinoids and so forth when they're combined with different terpenes. And so, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. No,
And then the race to the bottom thing. I always tell people, you don't have to have the cheapest weed if you got the best weed.
It's true. You don't have to smoke as much either.
Right. But if you are producing something that is more consistent and a better quality than your competition, you don't necessarily have to be as cheap as them. Because if your differentiation model to, make yourself different in the market is to be the cheapest, you're not going to have a loyal customer base. Because if your customer base that you're trying to win on price, the moment someone else is cheaper, that customer is leaving you because they're not loyal if you're not the cheapest. So you really, I don't think that's a great business model myself. But
I agree. I was head of education for a chain of dispensaries for a decade. Awesome. And one of the things that I was told by a gentleman came in specifically asked for me. He's like, I could buy my weed for less expensive somewhere else, but he listed off all of the qualities that we represented that had nothing to do with price.
Yeah.
That were the reasons that he stayed. And part of it was products always fresh. You don't just try to sell me something. You treat me with respect. And as a consumer, you educate me. And those are all really important things. But I think, you can have all the education in the world. And I, being an educator, I feel strongly about that. But if you educate and you're selling boof, well, you're kind of screwed.
Right. Yeah. True.
But so this week you're speaking on GMP compliance here at ICBC, and that term gets thrown around a lot. What does it actually look like in cannabis today?
Well, just at its heart, GMP is, we don't talk a lot about it in the States because it's really not something we focus on in cannabis in the US, but
right.
In international markets, it's huge. So it's really, at its heart, it's about identifying risks and then, identifying what your standards are and then putting the infrastructure and the processes in place to mitigate that risk. That's obviously a very, very baseline simplification of what it is. But so for us, it really means giving producers the ability to have that level of control, because ultimately if this market over here is very, pharmaceutical and medical based, then we definitely want to make sure that we're giving them a stable, safe product. And if we can't store that appropriately, so we can, be sure that there's not risk of microbial growth and things like that. And then also, if you have standards for, your GMP, what your standards are that you set forth, and when you deviate from those, well, that's kind of going against what you're trying to do. So then you have to document all those deviations, and if you don't have proper control, you're going to have a lot of deviations from your process and from the standards you've set.
Yeah. Well, talking about, because the standards are different here than they are in the United States. What do you think the United States can learn from this?
I actually would say that,
or even
markets over here could learn a thing or two from the United States.
I was just going to ask,
but not completely. In general, everyone needs to get a better understanding of what shelf stability is. And what I mean by that is, you hear terms thrown around like loss on drying. You hear people talk about moisture content. Those things have nothing to do with shelf stability. Your water activity, your free and available water, your active water measurement, that is what you need to know to basically verify that your product is shelf stable. So I think that in the EU, but also in a lot of states in the US, people are using the wrong metric because that's kind of stuff that's coming out of our legacy history that then is getting written into regulations. Whereas, food and pharmaceutical industries for decades have been using water activity as their measurement. We really need to get with the times and with the science and have that be our standard. So, I think that's one big thing that the EU, unfortunately, from what I see, is kind of missing out on is everybody here knows what water activity is, but it doesn't seem like it's actually as standard of a regulatory metric as it should be.
Mm-hmm. Where are operators most out of alignment with what regulators are expecting?
Where are operators?
Yeah, when you look at like what regulators expect versus what operators are putting out there, where do you think the disconnect is?
I don't think there's necessarily a lot of disconnect. I think that in general, people understand what the regulators are looking for. It's just being able to consistently achieve that and adhere to it at scale, especially as you're growing. If your business is expanding, I just think there's challenges to that. I think that there's not really a true disconnect. In some ways, I think the disconnect again is regulations being written maybe by people that don't necessarily understand cannabis. That I think is probably the bigger disconnect.
Yeah. I mean, we see that everywhere, right? One of the things that I think is interesting is we're starting to see more people who have connections to the cannabis industry running for office. And I feel like from a regulatory standpoint, like I'm the vice chair of the state advisory committee for California. And every time that I see somebody who's an operator running for office, I get excited because I'm like, okay, if they win, because of the way politics are and they're based on relationships and who listens to who, maybe we can have some better conversations in the room. Because it seems like I used to think that it was when cannabis was in the building, all common sense went out the window and we're talking about policy. But the more I work in policy, the more I realize that you have a lot of people, a lot of them with the best of intentions, but of course their wheelhouse can't be everything in the world. So how do they make thoughtful decisions around what our markets look like and the parameters around it? I
mean, no greater evidence of that than looking at the U.S. Farm Bill.
Yeah.
People making regulations and not understanding. I think that's a great point. If we could have more folks that are in the industry, or just, people have educated themselves about cannabis, whether they're an enthusiast or a consumer or an operator, to have more of a voice in those rooms, that would be amazing. I think that we still have a long way to go, though.
We sure do. Yeah, we do. But I don't know. Do you know Wanda James?
I've met her a couple times. My wife, I think, is connected to her more than I am, because I think they've done some podcasts and stuff together, because they're both have some connections in the New Jersey market specifically. That's right. That's right. Because she's with the Simply Pure over there. But she's
running for Congress.
That's what I did hear that. Well, I have seen that, and I do follow her on some social media and stuff. So I think that's great.
It's a first big step.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But it's a drop in a very large pool.
Right. Well, there's 400 and how many people in the house, and that would be one. So yeah.
But it's nice. It's nice to see the change happening. But let's pivot. Let's talk about scale. Yeah. So a lot of brands can produce great product at a smaller level, but things start to slip as they grow. Why does that happen?
Well, I think back to when my home state, Vermont, legalized and for recreational, and you had all these people that were very passionate home growers, and Vermont made it a somewhat easy market to get into, and you had all these people like, oh, I'm going to get one of these tier 1 licenses. It's only 1,000 square feet. I know how to grow weed. Well, it's a lot different than growing in a 4x4 tent or 4x8 tent, moving to 1,000 square feet. And it's no different moving from 1,000 square feet as being successful at that level commercially to 5,000 square feet of canopy to 10,000 to 50,000. Things that work on a small scale, whatever it is, not even just in cannabis, they don't always scale perfectly. You have to pivot and you have to adjust. One of the challenges would be if you don't have the right infrastructure to have really tight control of your process, and then have SOPs. A big, example of that in the dry cure would be, as you scale up, say when you were just a small operation, if you're the head grower, you're the one running it, and you feel like you've got the touch. You know when the flower is ready to pull out of the drying room. You know when the stem snaps just about right, and so forth. And then so if you have one person like that in your organization, and then, say now you're going to become a multi-state operator. Now is the person in this market that you have making that decision in this facility the same as the other facility? What happens if one of those people goes on vacation? So you really need to have consistency and repeatability kind of like institutionally before you can scale up. And any area where you can have opportunity for a little bit of variation at a small scale, well, that's just going to be magnified once you scale up. So just at its nature, it presents challenges. People underestimate what scale means in a lot of different ways, because conversationally it sounds easy, right?
Yeah.
I grow 1,000 plants, I can grow 2,000. I grow 2,000, I can grow 5,000. But where the rubber meets the road, obviously there's a steep learning curve.
Yeah, there's a huge difference between thinking about it and actually like having to contend with that kind of footprint.
And that's what I love about what we do at Cannatrol is we're able to help people out that are on all different stages of that journey. Like I said, from the home growers to, we work with a lot of craft producers. We work with some multi-state operators, giving them the ability to operate at the level they're at, but help them plan for their goals for scaling up, whether it is, again, a single state operator that wants to grow within their own market. Maybe they got visions of getting a license in a couple other markets and becoming a small MSO, whether it's, a small LP in Canada that knows that for their long-term viability, they need to grow and they need to look at being able to export into other markets. Giving them the tools to successfully do that as a partner, not just as someone trying to sell them something and move on to the next one, but really truly being a solutions provider. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
To be able to help people with that journey.
You were talking about exporting, and that's where I see, like, especially in this market where we may be leaning too heavily on remediation instead of fixing the process upstream. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I would agree. I think that nobody is rushing out to buy flour that that they know has gone through different whatever the remediation process is. It's kind of like a dirty topic. Like no one wants to discuss it, which is the reason when people have these big remediation units or machines, I'm not going to name companies, but at their facilities, when you go and tour them, it's not something they're like showing off. No one wants to like tell you that they have to remediate their product, because ideally they wish they didn't. I think that in certain markets with how tight regulations are and where product is produced, it's always going to be something that's going to be part of the industry. But if we can reduce our bioburden upstream, yes, we can reduce the need for remediation. That's, better SOPs and better, cleaning practices, sanitation in the grow. That is in the post-harvest, really getting the product shelf stable faster and holding it there. So if you are putting your product in a drying room and it's taking you 10 to 14 days, which the old legacy method, that's kind of the time frame a lot of people are using.
Totally.
That's 10 to 14 days after you harvested the plants, that whatever that microbial count was that came out of the flower room can still keep growing. That bioburden is going to increase. So if you can shorten that window of time, you can reduce the bioburden that's coming out of the dry cure process. So things like that, we can definitely do a lot better at as an industry to reduce the need for remediation. Yeah,
100%. I feel like we have a little bit of catching up to do with that, and consumers definitely can tell the difference, especially when they become well educated on what a good cannabis is. Think about the first time that you had something really good. It like changed the way you looked at all of your experiences of the past and in the future. I'm having so much fun with you, but as we like wind down here, I just have one more question for you. As Europe continues to evolve, what should operators be preparing for now?
Well, operators in other areas are going to have to continue to strive if they're GACP to get GMP, qualified, so that way that they can export into these markets because, grows in other parts of the world. This is probably their biggest opportunity right now. And then operators here should just, be prepared for the challenges ahead. Look to those other mature markets like the US, like Canada, because whether we're perfect or not, we're definitely not. There's a lot that can be learned. Like if you can learn from someone else's mistakes before you have to make those same mistakes yourself, you're going to be a lot further ahead of the game.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. So for people who be listening, or, we're beginning conference season. So if people want to get a hold of you and learn more about your product and up their game, how do they do that?
Well, they can look up us up on our website. It's Cannatrols.com, so with an S. They can also find us on Instagram. It's at Cannatrol. We're on Facebook, other social medias as well. Or they can definitely, if they go to our website, they can check our events page. They can see where we're going to be for conferences, what upcoming shows or podcasts we're going to be on. And yeah, definitely they should reach out, and we'd love to help them and help provide solutions to what their challenges are.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. And I'll see you on the floor of the show.
Sounds good. Thank you.
The Radio Misfits Podcast Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Planted with Sara Pine. I'm Sara Pine, your host, and we are back at ICBC in beautiful Berlin. And today I have a new friend and an old friend on the show. We're going to talk about some really exciting things. So I have Jillian Reddish, who's the co-founder of GCNC, and Beau Whitney of Whitney Economics. And they're releasing their Q1 Global Market Report here at ICBC, offering a real-time look at pricing trends, regulatory movement, and international trade, along with insights from operators and license holders on the ground. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us. This is my first time on the podcast, and I'm thrilled.
Yeah, thank you. My voice is a little hoarse because we've been talking about the exciting data and insights that we have in this report so much. So
I love it when you geek out on data. It's the best. And you and I, we've talked in Barcelona, in LA, in Iceland, in everywhere.
Yeah, we've been definitely talking about global cannabis and in all those beautiful places too. So I'm feeling pretty blessed that I have that opportunity to do so. Yeah,
well, you are quite the voice in our industry, and I'm so excited to hear what the two of you have come out with the report. For those of you listening today, I was thinking that Jillian and I were going to sit down, and then when my old friend Beau showed up, I knew that the three of us, I knew we were going to have fun anyway, but we were going to have extra fun with Beau joining us. So, Jill, since it's your first time on the show, the question I always like to ask all my guests is, what was your first cannabis experience?
Absolutely. So I grew up in Texas where it was not legal, still isn't, not on my radar. And then I moved to Seattle, Washington, and I asked my cousins, oh, so weed's been legal here for a year or something. What's that like? And they're like, it's fine. It's not much of a. And I was moving up there for graduate school, actually. Mm-hmm. And by the time graduation was nearing, one of my friends was a consumer every evening for dinner. And she was like, I think you need to try some edibles. And I thought, well, here I am finally about to get my master's degree, all these things going for me. I don't think a little bit of weed is going to derail me. And then 4 years later, here I started a career in cannabis, and now it's been almost 10 years. So everything's just twisty-turny. You never know where you're going to end up.
No, you don't. It's funny. So I was actually going for my master's in org psych when I started working in cannabis, and I thought it was just going to be a job while I was in grad school. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Here we are.
You just never know.
The plant is just magical, and it just opens up, doors for us all. It's just been incredible.
Yeah.
I'm so blessed that it's been in my life.
So before we get into the report, what is GCNC, and what are you tracking that others aren't?
Absolutely. Well, GCNC is the Global Cannabis Network Collective. We've been a professional networking organization going on 6 plus years, I think. And so we're a membership-based organization, and we support our member businesses with the global view, driving deal flow, creating connections all across the supply chain. So we work with everybody from operators and cultivators to ancillary businesses that spans a wide range. And in fact, one of those member businesses is now Whitney Economics. And so the amazing ancillary services that Beau provides with the data and economic assessment, that provides real value to all of these executives who are trying to figure out what are the strategic moves that I need to make? How can I build a successful long-term business? We work with the folks who are really thinking long-term, not just, I kind of want to get in, get rich, and get out. We're working with people who are here for the long term, and that's a challenging thing to do. You really have to think multiple steps ahead, which, we'll get into that as we talk about the report. But yeah, we're professional networking, driving deal flow, and with that comes these kind of marketing amplification and content that we provide. So we do webinars. My business partner, Chris Day, hosts our podcast, GCNC Worldview, where we're really looking at who's making the international moves, what's changing with policy, how is that impacting markets? There's so much to know out there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So we provide pretty multifaceted services for our members. And really, I like to kind of say, especially when I'm here at a conference at like ICBC, I'm a pollinator. I'm finding out, who are you? What are you doing? What do you need? Who do I know who does that? And what kind of connections can I create?
I love that.
It's very fun.
It is. And it's very essential because, there's a lot of people here today and not everybody is going to have a chance to connect. And when you have a friend who knows somebody, it's a very valuable thing to have that kind of cross-pollination.
Oh, absolutely. And so many of our members actually come to us through referrals, because it's realizing, oh, there's value here and I know someone who needs this too. So let's bring them into the network. And everything in cannabis already is so much, who do you know? And so that kind of validation and getting to know businesses, that's some pretty high level insights and connections that we can provide.
Yeah. How long has GCNC existed?
6 years. We kicked off in 2020, actually, which we were one of those businesses that kind of started in that time when the pandemic created an opportunity where previously, executives might have been hesitant to hop on a Zoom call with someone that they didn't already know, but nobody could meet in person and travel anymore. And so we'd been kicking around with the idea, the pandemic hit, and we realized, okay, let's do this. And that first 18 months when hardly anybody could travel, this is so essential to provide. We do monthly meetup calls and do a lot of curated introductions for people. So it was creating connections. And then, of course, now that we can be back at these conferences, we provide a lot of support. We do very curated networking events. I know a networking event that I host is a success if people come up to me afterwards and say, everybody who I wanted to talk to at that conference was in your room. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great compliment, and that's what we strive to deliver.
I love that. Well, I know every time that you have an event at a conference that I'm at, everybody is asking, are you going to be there? Are you going to be there? Are you going to be there? And when you hear that before the event, you know that people are really anticipating a wonderful room and a good time.
That's great to hear. Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So you're about to release your Q1 Global Market Report. At a high level, what are the most important signals coming out of this data?
Yeah, so I'll kick it off and I'll definitely hand it over to Beau for the deeper dive. But this is the first of a series of reports, and we're kicking it off with global pricing compression. And we, in our talks with Beau, we realize there's a whole repeatable cycle that's happening now with pricing compression in mature markets. And we're pulling the data from the US and Canada, looking at the different states like Beau's in Oregon, I'm in Colorado, some of the oldest markets in the States, right? Also, and Canada's following the same kinds of trends. So we're seeing repeatable models, and we're realizing executives who are in more emerging markets need to know that pricing compression is coming so that they can factor that into their plans. And everybody's already trying to figure out how to be as efficient in their operations as possible. But if you're basing it off of the pricing that is current in the first 2 years of a market, that's not what your price is going to be 5 years down the line. It's a big difference. So we're starting off with this report, comparing the data from the US and Canada right now, extrapolating that out and providing really useful insights. And pairing it also with some insights from executives of our network who are coming from Peru and Brazil and Germany and Canada, a couple other places, so that when you get this report, you're getting a really comprehensive 360-degree, view of what are other executives dealing with and facing in their markets.
It sounds like it's something that not only prepares people, but helps them not feel so all alone at the same time. Yeah. Yes.
Honestly, that's something that I'll tell people about GCNC is we create a safe space to talk to other executives when you're pulling your hair out, thinking, how do we deal with these issues? And it's like, okay, let me introduce you to 3 other people who've been there. Maybe they're not in your exact same market. Maybe they're in Peru or Mexico or something, but we're all facing similar business challenges, so we can figure out how to navigate it.
Yeah, there's a lot of bonding over the dark night of the cannabis soul.
Yes.
How much of what we're seeing right now is market correction versus long-term shift?
Well, one thing I wanted to mention about GCNC is that a lot of the history and evolution of the market came as a result of community. And now there's a global community and they help facilitate that. And so, when we talk about, I do a lot of research, obviously. And so I'll say, well, I wonder what's going on in Brazil, or I wonder what's going on in South America or Asia or Europe. We can just tap into that network in the community and then get resources and insights and all the like. So, and one of the genesis of this pricing compression report was that prices were going down in the US dramatically. And a lot of this had to do with being oversupplied. And and in a lot of these financial pro formas for investors and the like, a lot of the folks assumed the same price going on, forever. And whenever I'd see that, I'd be like, oh, great, this is, but what this attempts to do is it attempts to identify the risk associated with pricing compression and how to assess that and how to predict it. And if you can understand what the risk is, then you can address it proactively so that it doesn't impact your business as much as it would had it just, surprised you after the fact. And so we develop these predictive models because just like cannabis in economics in general, it's things are, for me at least, very predictable in this space. You can see an action, you can see a reaction, you can see a policy, and then you can see the impacts. You can see the demand, and then you can see the supply, you can see the pricing. All of this is related, but it's very, very predictable. And at Whitney Economics, our forecast accuracy for predicting what the demand will look like or the revenues will look like at the end of the year, when we do this at the beginning of the year, we were always like 96, 98% accurate. Mm-hmm. Well, in 2025, we're at 85. Now, a lot of forecasters, they would love to have 85% forecast accuracy, but to us, it was unacceptable, right? And so I was like, what is going on that I was so far off, And because we're always looking to improve our processes and the like. So I was like, okay, well, there's a consumer shift, a behavioral shift by the consumer. Because of inflation, because of macroeconomic conditions, the behavior of the consumer has changed. They're looking for value now. Whereas before they would spend the same amount every year or every month or every time they went to a dispensary, they would basically spend the same amount. And that's called the basket amount or the transactions per transaction spends. So we noticed that there was a shift to these value products, and part of the decline in the revenues and part of the issue with my forecast accuracy was due to just general behavioral change by the consumer. But then there was other things that we needed to account for, and that was pricing compression. So for the longest time in the U.S., the growth of the consumer participation was stronger than the impact of pricing compression. But pricing compression has been around for a while. So, but then in the last year, when consumer participation leveled off, then that pricing compression overwhelmed that. And that's what led to the first ever historic revenue decline in the U.S. market. So then as we're looking towards the global marketplace with GCNC, with Whitney Economics, as we're looking at that, we're like, well, I think we can develop a model, a predictive tool to look at these new markets like Germany, like France, eventually, like the Czech Republic. And then we can say, okay, well, at some point there's going to be this pricing compression. So let's get out in front of this and then tell people how much they need to account for in their operations or how much they need to account for in their investment, and so that they can understand what their margins, profitability, and all this stuff are. So that was kind of the genesis of the report. And then some of the reasons why we went about and why we expanded this. Now, in Germany, they've been importing a lot of cannabis, and they've been importing it from a majority of it is from Canada, but also from Denmark, from North Macedonia, from Israel, from Colombia, elsewhere. And so at one point, I was saying that there's going to be too much supply. Mm-hmm. And if there's too much supply, then prices go down. And so I was like, Germany importing a lot. And so sure enough, prices have gone down like 50% over the last couple of years. And a lot of that has to do with this oversupply in the marketplace.
This episode is brought to you by Fat Nugs Magazine, a global perspective of cannabis and stoner culture as a bridge to the rest of the world. Right now, you can join Fat Nugs Magazine, Beard Bros Farms, Freedom Grow, and Jailed for Weed in the upcoming Prisoners Edition and help spotlight current and past cannabis prisoners and their stories, because no one should be in jail for a plant. Find Fat Nugs Magazine's beautiful print copies at your local dispensary, fatnugsmag.com, and on socials. Cannabis culture welcomes us all.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we talk a lot about pricing compression and differentiation in our industry. For somebody who's listening in, who's more curious about the market and isn't as immersed in it as we are, how would you, in layman's terms, describe pricing compression?
Well, it's just, in very simple terms, it's prices that decline over time. And so a lot of people these days are talking about inflation, about prices going up, prices for gas, prices for food, prices for other things, prices for labor. And that's inflation when prices go up. Well, what we're experiencing in cannabis is deflation, where prices go down. Now, in a macro economy, deflation is horrible because people stop spending because the prices are going down. They're just going to wait and spend less later on. And so that's really problematic. Well, in the cannabis industry, it's really problematic, right? But you're seeing this in this deflation or price decline. You're seeing this to a pretty significant extent, not only in Canada and the U.S., but now starting in Germany and elsewhere.
Yeah. It's very impactful. I mean, I know, like in California, in the 215 days, of course, that was the time of plenty. As and I remember saying in a meeting, like, green rush is dead, everybody.
Yeah.
There's none of that anymore. But then, when we got into legalization, the overtaxation raised the prices for a while. And then now we've seen extreme deflation in prices and also a lot of extinction events.
Yeah. You've touched on a couple of things there that are factors that we address in this report, and I'll kind of circle back. Beau has this great chart that we're making available. When this is out, you'll be able to download the preview, and you'll see this chart of the kind of the life cycle of the entrepreneurial market here, where everybody gets excited with the green rush, where it feels like the growth is exponential. We all know how quickly it can happen. But then what happens is everybody sees that and thinks, oh, I'm going to jump in and get rich quick. But once that happens and there's too much, there's the oversupply, and then the curve levels off. And that's where the pricing curve that we're talking about, the pricing compression, starts to dip back down. And this shouldn't be a shock to anybody. This is how curves work. This is market economics.
When we were looking at Oklahoma, that's a great study in exactly what you were saying.
Exactly. Yeah. Because everybody was really excited when they opened up so many licenses all at once, and there's pros and cons to that. One of the cons is everybody jumped in, oversupply, and then the pricing tanks. Mm-hmm. And so another factor that you touched on, the taxation, of course, and that comes from our policymakers and our regulators. And so a key thing that we need to remind operators of is your market adult use, or is it medical? Two very different things, and those markets do behave pretty differently. And so while we're kind of here warning the German operators that, if you're at the point where the prices are going down, you need to get ready to be in it for the long haul. But before adult use in Germany, the prices were quite stable for a very long time because it was highly regulated as a medical market. And so that's something most of the EU countries right now are at that medical level, and they need to be really aware of what the policy and the regulators can do to a market, because these are not business folks for the most part, right? And there's often a disconnect, right? And so we're kind of seeing that the really overregulated markets, they can really struggle. And so we break down some of those models in the report. And that's why with GCNC, we asked a lot of our executives in different markets to contribute, the Peruvian market right now is a medical market with a little bit of kind of adult use for sale. There's more CBD. And so we're seeing some of those trends happening, some of the pricing trends happening that are predictable, right? We have some contributions from Mexico, which is still, it's a decriminalized, but still pretty medical market. But compare that to Brazil, that is strictly medical, with a whole different model where the producers sell directly to the consumers, and it's like mail order only through a pharmacy.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's great because it does get people their medication, but in a very narrow market, and there's still so much demand there. So, Brazil is one of those markets really to watch for the future.
That's fascinating. That's one of the things that I love seeing with the different markets, what their models are, how much they're based on their cultural ethos in many ways. Mm-hmm. But I also watch to see how many people are actually watching to see what came before, because we see a lot of reinventing of the wheel and a lot of the same mistakes being made over and over. And I can't help but wonder why they wouldn't save money and time by doing research beforehand.
So always a great question to figure out why do the regulators do what they do?
Right. Well, as somebody who works in policy, I have learned that cannabis is actually, it's kind of a very macro micro thing, because I used to think it was because of the stigma of our industry, but I think a lot of it is we have elected officials that are trying to do the best that they can, but they are not subject matter experts, so they're relying on influence. And our industry traditionally has not had a very strong lobbying effort to be able to inform as much as other industries.
And that is absolutely, and yet that is changing, and it's still a very different scenario in the UK compared to the US with the lobbying. But one of the kind of underlying goals, or long term with this report series, is this is meaningful data that the regulators need to see, and meaningful perspectives from the business leaders. So, there's some markets where countries open up to cannabis, and they think they're going to get all this tax revenue, and then when prices go down, there's a struggle. And so you kind of have to talk. We want to be able to encourage the business leaders to have that dialogue with their policymakers so that they can understand, the push and pull forces. And the data that Beau provides, I know he talks to a ton of policymakers all the time. That's a whole different podcast, right? His stories on that. There's a lot there, and that's why everything that Whitney Economics provides is so valuable because it's really, really grounded in that data. And the data, you can manipulate it a little bit, but the data doesn't lie.
Right? No, it doesn't. That should be the loudest voice in the room.
I do meet with a lot of policymakers, and they do make the same mistakes. There's a lot of copy and pasting of rules and regulations. Mm-hmm. But what I found in pricing compression is that consumers are extremely price sensitive. They will travel for a period of miles or kilometers in Berlin here in order to get a discounted price. And so when there's a tax policy question and they tax it too much, then it suppresses the incentive to participate in the legal market because there's all these different substitute markets like the illegal ones. And so just recently, prices have been going down in the US. And so tax revenues that are based on sales are going down. And so the politicians have said, our taxes are going down, our revenues are going down. We need to raise tax rates.
I hate that. Yes.
And so what happens is it provides a disincentive to legally participate, and purchasing actually goes down. So what I've been telling these policymakers is, hey, if you lower your tax rate, your tax revenues will go up. And they're like, huh? That doesn't make any sense. If you lower your rate, then revenues should go down. I said, that's not how cannabis works. So, Jill, you're right in the sense that this is a report that's good for operators to understand what's going on in the market, but it's also intended for policymakers as well to have a better, more grounded with data understanding of what's going on in the marketplace.
Mm-hmm. As we're looking for the rest of the year, what should people be paying attention to?
Well, we're excited to be launching a series of reports, and the ones for the rest of the year are going to focus on different regions. It's going to be like this one's on pricing compression, but the next ones will be a little bit more market deep dive. So the one that's next up will be looking at the UK and European markets. So, kind of a bigger economic picture. And I have to kind of give a shout out that I find the UK market particularly fascinating. It's a bit of an outlier. Culture plays a very big role in that market. Even though there's a high demand, there's a lot of British stoners out there, but they're buying from the gray market because the current access right now is really hard to navigate. And I think everybody's kind of wondering, why isn't the British market growing faster? And we're going to be providing answers into that, and probably also some scenarios of how to speed up market expansion from what we learn from other countries. So we'll have a EU and UK report coming out, and then we'll turn to Latin America. The whole broader region. And there's a lot of really interesting things that are happening in South America. We touched on Brazil, but also there's more happening in Ecuador and Argentina. All of these governments are kind of looking both to potential cannabis tax revenue, but also on the hemp side of things. Lots of really interesting stuff happening there. So we'll have Latin American region. And then we're also going to turn to Africa. There's plenty of folks here at the ICBC who are already operating in South Africa. More and more countries are doing more. Botswana, Rwanda. There's some really cool events happening in South Africa this summer where people are coming together as small businesses, but also looking at bigger operations with their eye on potentially importing into Germany and the EU.
Wow.
But we also kind of might be saying, don't bet too hard on that, because that's really tricky and very high operating costs. So anybody who's wondering what's going to be happening in those markets, we're gonna have that data. Beau, do you want to add anything there?
Yeah. A lot of the focus that we've had, we wanted to launch the pricing compression for operators and policymakers, but then there's so much interest in the European and UK markets that we thought we would kick off with that one first, so people can understand the market and the market dynamics, and the fact that while there's 27 different countries in Europe, and if you expand it to like Europe is like 54 countries. Each one has its own nuances and the like, but there's some commonalities, there's nuances. The South America one, I gave a speech at an event that was hosted at the United Nations in New York. And during that conference, there was a woman from Brazil. And at that time, CBD even was illegal. And we talked about how there was this large number of people imprisoned for drug trafficking, but almost 90% of them were women. And so it kind of blew my mind by that statistics. But what was going on is that moms who had kids that had some issues heard about CBD, and they started importing it, or they started carrying it in from other countries, and then they would get busted and thrown in jail. And so there was all this disruptive activity. So it's nuances like that. Now look at it, they've reformed, and there's a lot more dynamics in that market, and there's a general acceptance now. So it's, there's things like that evolve markets that are really important to kind of articulate. And then Africa, so one of the largest markets in the world in terms of continents or regions is Africa. And so they don't spend a lot because there's not a lot of money there, but they consume a lot. And so one of the largest consuming countries in Africa is Nigeria. And they have consumption numbers that are mirroring the United States and mirroring some EU countries. And so that's, people just don't really think about Africa. And so we try to help provide some insights as well. And I gave a speech in Zimbabwe a few years ago, and they've deployed medical now. But back then they were like, how do we do this? What do we do? I thought hemp was marijuana, and so they had a lot of questions, but we were able to provide some insights, and those insights ultimately led to the opening up of that market.
That's amazing. I think all of the information that you have and the experiences interacting with the operators in the markets, it just creates a richer conversation, and it helps set the industry as a whole up for greater success. So I thank you for sharing this with me. I can't wait to hear about the other reports and geek out with you guys on those. For people who want to participate GCNC, get the data, see what you're doing for the rest of the year, how do they do that?
Yep. Turn to our website first. It's easy to remember, gcnc.global. We get the global everywhere. So gcnc.global. We're also really active on LinkedIn. That's also a pretty easy way to reach out and find us. So the reports will be available on our website as well as the whitneyeconomics.com, because this is a partnership. So you can find it in both places.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both of you. I've so enjoyed our conversation, and I'm looking forward to some more as the year continues.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much out there to discuss, so many, rich and active markets happening. And it's been great to give kind of a voice to some of the operators in our network, and then to pair it alongside Beau's fantastic data assessment. This is going to be a really rich and valuable report to get your hands on.
Awesome. Get out there, get the report, get involved. Thank you so much. And everyone, remember, if you like listening, please Give us a review, share it with a friend, let us know what your favorite episodes are, and if you'd like to stay in touch over social media, we are Planted with Sara Pion on Facebook and Planted with Sara on Instagram and Twitter. You can also go to our website, www.plantedwithsara.com, or listen to us on our parent network, Radio Misfits Network, where there are other great podcasts, like one of my favorites, the Winemakers Podcast. So check it out. You can listen to Planted wherever you listen to your favorite podcast, whether that's Pandora, Spotify, Amazon, Google, Apple, Stitcher. Tune in. We are there. So join us. And until next time, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, it's a wild world out there. Be good to one another. Until next time, take care.